Everyone, welcome back to my next video. Today I'm going to begin a long series. In fact, it won't even be a series. It'll just be incorporated into the channel, but it's going to be a thrust on planning. You know, it's really important that we all do planning because there's an old saying, the 6 P's: prior proper planning prevents poor performance. And I think that's really important. And I know the reason I first had to move into a van was because I did not have adequate planning. Well, that's not 100% true. I planned, I just couldn't keep up with the plan. And I know that a very large percentage of my audience are here because at this point in your life, you know, your world just kind of fell apart and you were forced into living in a van. My guess is, it's just a wild guess, is it's 60-40. About 60% of those of you who are listening here were forced into living in a vehicle, whatever the vehicle is, because of a failure of prior proper planning. Now, let me say right off the bat, and we'll talk about this in detail, is I'm not blaming you and I'm not blaming myself. We'll talk about how it happened. And so when I say a failure to properly plan, that does sound like, it sounds like an insult, like I'm blaming you, and I'm not. And we'll talk about that at length. But let me tell you my story. Well, you know my story if you've been listening to the channel for any length of time. I'd gone through my life. I came to a divorce. The divorce happened. And after the divorce, I was so economically devastated, I couldn't afford to maintain 2 households. So when a really unknown and unexpected big problem came up in my life, it just threw my life into disaster. I had to move into the van. I could barely survive. I felt like a total failure. And I know a lot of you, hopefully you don't feel like failures. Hopefully your life has gotten better, just like mine did. In fact, I now look back at that being forced into the van and think that's one of the best things that ever happened to me. I'm so grateful it happened to me. But as I look forward to the rest of my life, big unknown things are still coming. That's the thing about that's how, you know, the nature of an unknown thing is it's unknown. And I wasn't expecting a divorce, but a divorce happened. It isn't so much that I failed to plan, because I had wanted to plan. In fact, what happened was I got married, and I was making my last time I worked at a full job for a full year was 2006. Then I retired. No, it was in 2005, and I retired in 2006. And that year I made $36,000, which was the average wage in America at that time. I was an exactly average worker. But I could never get ahead, and I wanted to. I tried to. Uh, my wife and I, my ex-wife, had agreed that we'd had 2 kids, and we wanted her to stay home and raise the kids. I mean, why have kids if you're not going to raise them? And so that was we were very involved in church, and that was, you know, that's what was taught at church, and I believe in that. I do believe in that. She stayed home and homeschooled and raised the kids. Well, if the 2 of us had worked and made $36,000, money would have been a much less an issue. With just one of us working, it was hard, really hard. We couldn't. It was always 1 step forward, 2 steps back. That describes our whole married life financially, you know, with money. So one of the things I started doing was buying U.S. savings bonds, because at that time they had a bond that was inflation proof. It kept up with inflation, and then they paid like 1%. So we were buying those, and I had a bunch of them. Every paycheck, I got a bond. And if I had been able to hold on to those, man, we would have been set. Right now, because they would have kept up with inflation, they would have been worth a lot of money, and they would have accumulated, and we would have split them at the divorce, and we both would have been in pretty good shape. But of course, you know, so I started accumulating them, and I can remember so well, some financial problem came up, and we had to sell all the bonds to pay for that bill. 1 step forward with savings, 2 steps back with some unknown, unexpected problem. Right now in 2019, because of COVID, I didn't use 2021 or 22 numbers, because those have been affected by COVID. They're out of the ordinary, and some people went up and some people went down in COVID financially. In 2019, they've done polls, and I've seen numerous polls, and 70% of Americans did not have $1,000 in the bank. If an emergency came up, just like me, they had no cash, If an emergency came up, they wouldn't have been able to pay for it. Now I had those savings bonds, but I had to go and cash all those savings bonds to pay for whatever the emergency was back then. 45% of Americans have zero money in the bank. And that's exactly where I was. I had these savings bonds, but I never had a penny in the bank. Every year at the end of the year, we saved and saved and saved, and we spent a little bit on ourselves on a vacation or something that we'd been saving towards. It was always one step forward, two steps back. We were always behind the curve. And I know that that's where most of you are. So I'm not blaming you for, I'm not blaming any of us for this. I believe the system is rigged. We live in capitalism. Now, capitalism is by far the best economic system ever devised. However, it's a wonderful tool and an evil, horrible, vile master. And that's what we have become. Capitalism has become the master and we are its servants. And it is not kind to its servants. So that you can't get money ahead. You are living check to check. I read another survey that said, they just asked people, are you living check to check? And 33% of Americans said yes, they lived check to check. If they ever didn't get a check, they would be wiped out. Let's think about how the system is rigged. First, it's rigged by business and media, corporations all working together to make us want to buy more. We are a buy now, pay later society. So while 70% of us have less than $1,000 in the bank, we can't cope with a real emergency. Even buying a new set of tires for a lot of us would push us over the edge. And 45% have zero. Anything at all will push you over the edge. We all tend to have a whole lot of debt. The average credit card debt is $3,200. So the average American has $3,200 in debt, in credit card debt. That's just over the whole 330 million of us, averaged out. But 45% of us don't have a penny in the bank. So we're great at accumulating debt, but we're really terrible at savings or having anything saved away for a problem. And problems are coming, my friends. They always are. They always have been. They always will be. There's always a step forward, two steps back. You got to go 3 steps forward to get ready for the 2 steps back. And our society is rigged so you can't. So we're taught to get it, to want it now, get the best. Peer pressure and media pressure, advertising in every area of our life, buy now, pay later. So we're always doing the 1 step forward, 2 steps back. So proper planning is really, really important. And that's why I emphasize over and over and over again, have an emergency fund, have an emergency fund. So I know that for a lot of us, I can preach have an emergency fund until I'm blue in the face. And hopefully you start with one. I just met someone and visited with them the other day. She's been on the road for 3 years. She was so grateful for her life. She had a problem and then she dipped into the emergency fund. She had another problem, she dipped, always this, there's no going forward. She's not saving any more money. It's always a step back, 2 steps back. And now she's been on the road for 3 years. Her emergency fund is gone. The next problem she has with her vehicle, she's done. And she doesn't know what happens next. So I understand that it's a rigged system. The system is rigged to you and I create wealth, and then that wealth is scooped off and goes to the top. That's predatory capitalism. Capitalism works as a servant, but it's no longer the servant. It's only the servant of the very few. The very few are served superbly well. I mean, capitalism works so well for them. It doesn't work so well for you and I, does it? That you can't even maintain an emergency fund for 3 years and then you're wiped out. And that's just one story, but I know I have heard so many stories and emails and comments and people I meet that living in a vehicle saved their life because they were done. This last thing came up. They were getting the eviction notice. They lost their job. They got the eviction notice. Where were they going to go? And they found a whole new hope in living in a vehicle. But now that you're in the vehicle, you still have to be planning because we live in a very dangerous, unknown world. Let's think about some of the things that are going on in our world right now. Well, first you have politics. You have national politics. We have an insurrection. People storming the Capitol building trying to change an election. Who would ever have thought that was a possibility? And yet there are people who don't even think it was an insurrection, that it was a good thing, and we should do it again until we get it right. The division, political division in our country is a bad, bad thing. We can't talk to each other. We can't reason together. We can only insult each other. And then we have to get, after so many insults, we have to separate. We can't even get together and talk anymore. What's the future of that? I don't know, but I don't think it's good. And then you have international politics. We've got wars going on. The first real, real war since the end of World War II, where one country is trying to obliterate another country. And that leads into economic problems. We got inflation going on. Inflation has been kept under really good control for the last 20 or 30 years. And now it's back, and it's probably back here to stay, and probably just going to get worse. And so your money's going to be wiped out. So you get $1,000 a month, and today you can buy $1,000 worth of stuff with that. In a year, you only be able to buy $900 worth of stuff with that. And a year after that, you only be able to have $800 worth of stuff, because inflation is going to keep wiping it out. It's one step forward, two steps back. That's what's going on. Your emergency fund will diminish even if you maintain it at $3,500. Let's say you got in there. It will start to diminish because the costs of everything that you dip into it for, instead of being a $200 repair, it'll be a $300 repair. Instead of being an $800 repair, it'll be a $1,500 repair. And one of the worst things going on, the supply chain problem. And so people can't get their trucks going. I just had a breakdown and was in the shop for a week because we couldn't get a part. We had to wait on the part. It didn't come in. We had to reorder it, and it didn't come in. And then we got it finally, and I was on the road. Well, I was lucky because this was a common part to fail, and so they kept a lot of them in stock. And even then, I had to wait to get this. So supply chain problems are going on, and food is going to be one of the biggest issues coming up. Ukraine and Russia supply some of the largest suppliers of wheat and corn in the world, and they're not Ukraine, at least they're not going to be hard planting and harvesting, and so that's going to really break up that supply. And globally, food is becoming a big issue because of the weather. And there's the one that is just, I don't care what you think about climate change. The weather's gone screwy. I mean, you cannot deny that. Let's think about British Columbia in 2021. In June of 2021, all of the Northwest was hit with this incredible heat dome. And I was up there in Medford, Oregon. It was all the heat Northwest and a lot of the country. It was 105, 110 every day for 2 or 3 weeks straight. It was unbelievable, the heat. A little town called Lytton, British Columbia, it hit 121 degrees. When I read that, I could not believe it. 121 degrees in British Columbia. This is forest. This is far north forest. It can't get to 121 degrees. It did. And in all of British Columbia, during this whole heat dome thing last June, in June of 2021, 500 people died just of heat. And that's the ones they know about. How many died? They can't directly attribute it to heat, but it was heat. Because no one's prepared for 120 degrees that far north. It doesn't happen. It can't happen, but it did. And so then this little town of Lytton hit 120 degrees, and the very next day, the whole town burned down. What are you going to do if all of a sudden where you're at, it's 120 degrees, people are dying, and then the town burns down? And then in the fall, they have, in November, they had the worst flooding British Columbia has ever seen. And I don't know if you saw the pictures, but it was incredible. Livestock died by the thousands in British Columbia in this flood. Roads were destroyed. No one could drive. It was just unbelievable. And that was all in 1 year in British Columbia. So that's why I'm using that as an example. But it's going on everywhere. It's going on everywhere, all across the country. Fires, floods, extreme heats. Then we have really bad hurricanes, multiple hurricanes. In 2020, the Gulf Coast of Louisiana was hit 5 times by 5 major storms. Never happened before. Just boom, a huge storm. Boom, a huge storm. How do you get ready for that? How many steps ahead can you get when that happens? So what I'm going to talk about coming up, and there's going to be a lot of it, is things you can do that aren't just money. Now, the first thing is always money. If you're out of money, if your emergency fund is going to run out, if at all possible, if you can still work, stop driving and get a job and build up your emergency fund. That's still number one, especially with inflation. You still have to have money in the bank. But this is going to be a long series about other things you can do. How can you drive less? So that you don't have to burn gas and you won't put miles on your car. And how do I deal with cold? So maybe I can't drive all the way north and all the way south. I have to stay in one place and be cold. Well, we'll talk about putting up hot tents. And because you could buy a good hot tent for 300 bucks. A hot tent has a stove jack where you can put a stove pipe through it. Well, I'm not going to go into all these details. I could get started because I love to talk about all of it. That's what you're going to be seeing. A lot of ideas for how you can plan ahead. Prior proper planning prevents poor performance. And so we're going to talk about ways you can do it. We're going to talk a lot about food, about heat, about driving, about just a lot of different ways that you can save money and prevent problems in the future, preventing problems through planning. No one should be better prepared than a nomad because you can turn that key and drive away. You can hear the road forecast, there's going to be bad flooding. You can hear the forecast that fires are coming. We'll talk about how to do all those things. You can go to a better place. You can sit in one place and stop driving. Instead of driving 8,000, 10,000 miles a year, maybe you can only drive 2 or 3. And your emergency fund will go a lot further because you're not having breakdowns because you're not driving. So all of these things are going to pay off with proper planning. With proper prior planning, we can prevent the poor performance that has hit a lot of us. And so that's what this is going to be all about. Stay tuned, it's all coming. This is just the introduction, and you'll start seeing it. I'll be posting at least one a month, maybe 2 a month, and you'll get an idea of how you can have that prior proper planning, and you can have success in a very dark and dangerous world sometimes. So the most important element that will run as a theme through all of this is building community. Nothing is more important than for proper planning is to have friends and community and connections in your life. Building community is going to be a core to your planning. Together, we can survive things we could never survive alone. And so that's where we're going, to build community. That's probably the #1 part of planning. Will you join with me in this journey of planning, prior proper planning, and of building a life that will endure a very dangerous future? What are you doing now? What ideas do you have that you're doing to planning for a dark and dangerous future, a very unknown future? I'd love to hear from you and what you're doing. If you got anything out of this video, and I hope you did, and I hope you get something out of all the videos that are coming up, like us on YouTube, subscribe to the channel, hit that thumbs up button, and we'll talk to you on the next video.